Welcome to the Massive Change Show. I'm Justin Foster.
And I'm Dr. Virginia Lacayo. In each episode, we have conversation with leaders who are getting in some good trouble by challenging paradigms and shaking the system.
And after each conversation, the episode shifts to the second show, where Virginia and I chat about what we learned from the guest.
If you know of any leaders who will make a great guest, please introduce us.
And of course, if you enjoy the show, please like, share, and leave a review.
Thanks for listening.
Welcome to Season 2 of the Massive Change Show. In this first episode of Season 2, we welcome Adrian Röbke. Adrian is based in Brazil and is an expert in systems thinking and what's called network weaving. If you don't know what that is, stay tuned. In this episode, we talk with Adrian about how to weave impact networks to co-create systemic change. Thanks for listening. Welcome to another episode of the Massive Change Show. This might be a little bit of a simplification, but it is helpful to understanding the kind of guests we're going to have on in Season 2. Is that the world is kind of roughly divided into people who think everything is fine the way it is. Then there's a big chunk of people that are apathetic. And then there are people that are trying to change the system. Within that group is a sliver of people we call the system shakers. So this season of the Massive Change Show, we're introducing you to new people that we're meeting, new friends we're making, new contacts we're meeting that are all getting in some good trouble, as John Lewis said. And so we're really excited to kick off this new series of talking to system shakers from all over the world.
And today we have invited someone that I met on LinkedIn, through LinkedIn, because we share a lot of topics and values in common. And I ran into his post and I was like, this is exactly, you really have to follow him. His name is Adrian Röbke. Am I saying it right?
Röbke, yes.
And he posts about, and he talks about network weaver, and it's not what we understand by networking, like meeting people and giving business cards and never calling back. And really, we have no idea what real network means and all the potential it has. And that's Adrian's specialty, and that is part of the system thinking approach that we also bring to the work that we do with organizations and with leaders. So we think that this is a very, very important topic to discuss because everybody can benefit from network weaving really more, not just you as a leader, but also organizations and social movements and fields and really everybody. So welcome to the show, Adrian.
Yes, thank you, Virginia, and thank you, Justin, for having me. I'm honored to be here. Yeah, my name is Adrian. The strange last name is coming from Germany. That's where I was originally born. And for about a decade, I'm working in this field of systems change, particularly, as Virginia mentioned, this practice of network weaving. So going beyond individual organizations and communities and really looking how can we collaborate, how can we share knowledge, how can we bridge our ideas and innovations in a way that it really unfolds these larger systemic changes? And I'm excited to dive into this with you today.
Wonderful. So we'll dive into it, as you said, Adrian. And the first question we ask, as people that listen know, is what idea or concept that are you working on that is going to piss off powerful people?
Yeah, I think that's a great question to start with. So obviously, the idea we're going to unpack today is about network weaving, and I just want to situate that a bit in terms of what problem is that actually addressing. So if we're looking into the world today, we're not just facing, simple, mundane issues, but we are facing what's called wicked problems. So you think about the climate crisis, you think about poverty, all these social injustices. Those are massive, complex problems. And the issue is that not a single organization or person can address that. But still, a lot of, impact models have this idea of the hero, that's kind of coming in to save the day, that has the solution, the entrepreneur or the technology that's just going to change these things. And network weaving in that sense is different because it says that, we need to build these larger ecosystems and people, organizations collaborating with one another to address these problems. And I want to be very clear about this, is that weaving in itself is actually an ancient practice. It's nothing that's new. Indigenous cultures have always said that we are interdependent. We're interdependent with the planet, with each other, and obviously there has been a lot of oppression, and these cultures have been in many ways eradicated, even though they've been always saying we need to take care of the planet and this interconnected web of life. So I wanted to acknowledge that there are many indigenous roots of this practice. However, what is new is the complexity of the 21st century, right? We have all these different sectors, we have all these different types of organizations. It's really this globalized society. So yeah, that's where network weaving becomes really relevant to create innovation and impact and transformation. Yes.
So how would that be alarming, Adrian, to like somebody that is reliant on the current power structures? Why would they feel threatened by that? Because as you say it, I'm like, well, that sounds like a great idea. Who would not like that?
Yeah. So I think one piece is that the current power structures, systems of oppression, they are based on a story, which many people have called the story of separation, right? So we're always dividing and conquering. We're always drawing lines around gender, race, sex, able or not able, disabled. So there's all these lines, and along those lines, the systems create violence and create a lot of pain and a lot of harm, particularly in marginalized communities. And I think we need to be a bit more specific. When I say network weaving, it's not about how everybody just collaborates and co-creates and has a good time. I think it's about organizations who are working towards systemic change, who are challenging the current paradigm, who are challenging the violence that's happening, who are challenging the extraction of the planet and all these kind of degenerative ideas, and creating more power and more flows of collaboration and knowledge in between those, so we can actually become more systemically relevant. So that's about really challenging these ingrained power structures. And yeah, there is definitely a tension that you're already naming in terms of how far are we collaborating and when do we, call out, challenge, interrogate power structures, so that's like a big part of this work already,
Mm-hmm.
of differentiating those. Yeah.
Is network weaving your term or a term that you've crafted, or where does that come from? The terminology.
So the first time I came across it was from June Holly. She's done a lot of work on this, on network weaving. So that was really a moment where I've been doing this work, but I've never really named it, and I hadn't
Mm.
crafted like a identity around it. And then when I first read about it, I was like, my whole body was like, yes, this is what I'm doing, and this is the
Mm.
direction I want to go into. But again, connected to this point that weaving is actually an ancient practice, I know that many indigenous cultures have been talking about weaving as a metaphor for
Mm.
the web of life, this kind of sense of interconnectedness. So I
Sure,
want to kind of appropriately, name that.
that's
And
great.
for and this network weaving, I mean, there is, as I said at the beginning, there is a lot of misunderstanding and myth around what it means to do network and to network. And it happens with communication as well. Everybody thinks that because they have an opinion, they can communicate. And it's not necessarily the same thing. And with networking, people might think that, oh, yes, I'm an extrovert. I'm a people, person. And I can connect a lot of people. And I have a huge network on LinkedIn or in social media. That's not what we're talking about. I understand that to really become a network weaver, you need to develop certain skills and understand things and understand systems and networks in a specific way, right? So is part of your approach to share, to teach, to provide tools for people to learn how to do it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So thanks for naming that, Virginia, because I feel like it's important to differentiate a bit, what's the kind of traditional kind of networking and then network weaving. And there is a great article written by Christine Capra on it. So if you're listening to this and you want to kind of dive deeper into that differentiation, I'd recommend that. But with traditional networking, it's all very transactional. As you mentioned, like we're going to these business events and then exchanging credit cards, but it's oftentimes still very egocentric. So like, what can another person do for me? And even if I'm giving something, it's like, down the line, I want that person to do something for me, right? So that's more the mode of relationship. And if we're talking about network weaving, this is more of an eco-centric or ecosystem centric practice where I'm not necessarily thinking just about my own benefit, but I'm thinking about the well-being, the thriving, the impact of a larger ecosystem. And then a very basic practice of network weaving is what we call closing triangles. And you've done this before as well in your career, where you see that there's two people and they share interests, they maybe work in the same field, and you feel like, if those two people meet, like maybe they can start a project together, or at least they can learn from each other. So as a weaver, I'm always looking for these opportunities to create some kind of synergy between different people. And that's on a micro level, right? So I'm connecting two people on a micro level. But then if you look at it on the ecosystem level, we're trying to build more and more connection and deeper relationships across that so that we can create really collaborative projects and innovations together. And in terms of the skills, yeah, it's a very nuanced and very complex kind of craft, if you want to say. Like there's an art, there's a science to it. And within the Weaving Lab, which is a global community of weavers, within the last 7 or 8 years, we've been developing a kind of way to look at the practice. And I want to note that there is many different ways to weave. There is not one right way to weave. There is not one right way to understand it. But I found these 4 capacity areas really helpful. So let's dive into those just very quickly, and maybe then we can zoom in a bit. So the first one is about cultivating relationships. And again, those are relationships which are nourishing, trust-based. They create a sense of belonging. They are not transactional, but they are really deep in that sense. So it's relationships between people, but also between ideas, projects, systems, sectors. So that's the first piece. The second one is like, once we cultivated these relationships, how do we start collaborating in a way that it becomes systemically relevant? So this goes into understanding, systemic dynamics, root causes of the problems that we're facing, and then really being able to bring a lot of different organizations together to work on strategies that become systemically relevant. The third one is about learning together. So this is really, we don't really know how a regenerative and equitable world and paradigm looks like, right? So we need to keep on learning individually through self-reflection and inquiry, but also together. So weavers facilitate, spaces for collective inquiry and curiosity, experimentation, play. And then the fourth piece is around embodiment, so embodying well-being. And when I say well-being, I mean the integrated well-being of individuals, societies, and the planet. So it's not just this individualistic sense of well-being, with like going to a yoga retreat and feeling good, but it's really about these 3 levels: the self, the society, and the planet coming together. And embodiment, why? Because a lot of this stuff can stay in the head, like we can think that we're all collaborating, but weavers really embody specific qualities of, compassion, of, deep listening, patience. So it's really about, walking the talk essentially. So those are the 4 capacity areas, and I think we could dive into each one of those a bit more thoroughly if you'd like.
And you're coming up with a tool, with a game, right? That is the network weaver game that's the intention, is to share, to teach these capacities. Would you
Yeah.
talk a little bit
So yeah. So by now, as you're listening to this episode, for you, if you're listening, it's already gonna be out, and we've been working together with a group of 25 weavers from across the whole globe for the last 1.5 years, and really built a tool that is a series of reflection questions, essentially, where you can see what are your current strengths, what are your current, learning challenges, how do you want to grow as a weaver. It just takes 15 minutes to kind of really self-reflect on your own practice. And then we have a whole ecosystem of tools for you to learn about weaving and basically build your own approach and your own style. Because when I started with this work, again, it was like 10 years ago, it took me a long time, to kind of take it all in, to understand. And I'm still learning, because as I said, it's a complex practice. So we kind of wanted to make that easier and make it a bit less overwhelming and confusing to understand what weaving is, and to develop, specific skill sets and mindsets and practices that you can then, use in your communities and your network. So that's already out by now. And if you're listening to it now and you want to become a weaver, or you want to deepen your weaving skills, I'd highly recommend, just going over there and taking the self-reflection questions. Yeah.
We're going to definitely share the link on the show notes. So, but another question that I have is, how all this work that you're doing, what are the main challenges that you're facing? Like resistance, objections, challenges to, for instance, to make the game spread out, that accessible and that people actually use it.
Yeah. Well, I think one challenge in society in large, which is something that we talked about, is that this story of separation is so persistent. There's so much fragmentation, conflict, violence, and we need to kind of stand up to that. So I think I spoke to that in the beginning a bit, but there is a very delicate tension around, how much do we step into co-creation with others, and particularly, we need to resist actors who are, putting out fascist and colonial and oppressive systems, right? So there is really this balance, and I think that connects to this third capacity area, which is learning together. It's not just about learning new things, it's really about unlearning as well, because we have these ingrained mindsets and patterns, and I'm going to be open and humble about that. Just based on where I've been socialized in Germany, I have a lot of blind spots. Germany has been like a colonial nation. Germany is still, exporting weapons and so on. And to some degree, I'm complicit in that, right? So it's my responsibility to start unpacking that and unlearning that, and seeing like, how do I show up in ways that are actually harmful, no matter how good my intentions are. There's like, I think there's a saying of like, good intentions pave the road to hell as well. Like, as long as I'm operating, or we in these networks are operating still from colonial mindsets, we're not going to be able to significantly shift the system. So I think that's like a big collective, but also individual challenge, is to really look at that thoroughly and go through the transformation. I think another piece is around, like, so many bodies are so agitated, are in a state of the nervous system which is in fight or flight, like very overwhelmed. So in order to collaborate effectively, it's important to have like a somewhat regulated nervous system, because otherwise we just keep on, triggering each other, and we reproduce trauma. So another piece I think around this is like to learn how to regulate ourselves, to create spaces for deep healing where we unpack these, past and present harms. So all of that is very nuanced and complex and obviously charged. So it takes a lot of skill and self-awareness to do this work. And then I think, just for me personally, I'm making this shift in my work where I focused a lot on weaving network myself, and I still do that with the Fito network. We have a big networks festival coming up. If you're interested in that, we're convening 1,000+ practitioners from all around the globe in a lot of different sessions around networks. So I'm really involved in that and weaving this network. And simultaneously, I'm also moving in a position of, being more of a capacity builder myself, and, like creating spaces for people to learn. This podcast is one example. So it's, the challenge is, how do I refine my practice and how do I make my own shift that instead of trying to do all the weaving myself in a way, how can I, support others to kind of grow into this practice and grow into this identity? Yeah, and then because as of now the Weaver game is not launched yet, there is not like a specific challenge, but I'm sure there's going to be many. And if you're listening to this and if you've played the Weaver game and you have some ideas and feedbacks on how to improve it, we also have like a feedback form. I'd love to hear how to build this body of work. Yeah.
Awesome. Talking about
That's
collaboration.
great. Adrian, do you find it challenging to take what you're talking about? It's complex and it's rich, it's dense, and be able to express it in a way that honors that complexity, but doesn't. So you don't want it to become reductionist, but you also want people to be able to sort of get it. And I ask that sort of for my own interest or our interest, because sometimes, even though I'm a messaging guy, branding guy, trying to explain our philosophy and our approach and what we envision and our purpose and everything, it's hard. So I'm wondering if that's a challenge for you. And I think it's a two-way. I'm wondering if it's a two-way challenge. Is it hard to communicate it in general, and is it hard to communicate it in a way that's not too reductionist, where you feel like where you're betraying or not fully honoring the richness of what you're working on?
Yeah, no, that's definitely a challenge. And I think like that's a wider problem in the field of people doing this work that, like I think we see the importance of it, but in some ways it still feels like very ungraspable in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been like working a lot on this and I've been much more challenged in the past, that I feel now, particularly with the Network Weaver game, we've really put a lot of effort into making the language very clear and accessible, and really just inviting people into their own kind of self-led learning journey. So the Weaver game is really just the start where you kind of reflect on your understanding, your current skills. But then there is like an introduction guide to weaving, which is very accessible language, very kind of broken down, but still inviting people into the complexity. And then there is like other kinds of pieces, newsletters and content and so on, where I keep experimenting with how to kind of frame this work and bring people into it. So I'm happy about those developments because it's been something that I've been struggling with a lot. And yeah, I feel like foundationally, it's like, how do we invite people into a learning journey, into like a path of inquiry, into, getting people curious about it? Because it's not the problem that there aren't a lot of resources out there. I think that's always, surprising, is like, when I went down that rabbit hole, like all these years ago, I found so many different things and so many great articles and books and so on. And we've composed a lot of those as well in a self-study guide, so you can, go deeper. And I think it's just creating these learning journeys and supporting people and kind of making sense of it by themselves. And yeah, so it still is a challenge, but definitely worked on that a lot. And yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because all of our clients are doing something that's esoteric in its nature. It's like a philosophy. It's a philosophy with a system behind it, each of our clients. And you're similar. You have a philosophy with a system behind it. And sometimes I'll hear people like our clients will say, yeah, but it feels so esoteric. I'm like, well, that's because it is esoteric. But there's a gift in that, because esoteric contains within it the epiphany. So when they get it, when someone's listening, there's this, oh, I see it now. And you can't manufacture that. Like, it's like a cosmic sneeze, like it's not something you can fake. And anyway, so I think it's just fascinating and kind of encouraging to talk to someone else that deals with some of the same struggles we have in that area. So, did you have any follow-up, Virginia, before I go to the third question? I didn't want to speak over you.
No, I mean, we're going to discuss more in the after show, but just to empathize with that, and it resonates with me because for me is when you speak two languages like Spanish and English or French, and you know how hard it is to translate a lot of concepts that are metaphors, for instance, or humor. There's some things that are impossible to translate literally. And you have to figure it out a way to explain. You explain a joke and it is not funny anymore, but that's the only way. In this case, we're talking about different paradigms. We're talking about an ecosystem paradigm. I mean, something that we're talking from a paradigm that looks more like an ecosystem, and we talk about the ecosystem, and we talk about the network, and we talk about how the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Two minds that they only see a mechanical paradigm when everything is linear, when one plus, two plus two is four, where everything makes sense within a box, where everything is structured like that. So it's really in some way to talk in different languages and trying to make that translation that make it a little bit challenging. But the good thing about system thinking also is that there is so many metaphors that illustrate those concepts that we can use, and people go like, oh, okay, now I get it. So yes, I start the challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, what's just coming up from me is like, yeah, one thing is around language and being clear about what these practices are, but in many ways those practices aren't clear, right? And like we don't want to define it and box it. And I feel like it's more about creating internal but also collective experiences where it just becomes very apparent, that we are connected, that, like the more we trust each other, the more there will be well-being. Like it's really like more about a felt sense of, belonging. And that's why this fourth capacity area is so much about embodiment, right? It's not just about the words and the concepts. And I think like a lot of systems change efforts also get stuck in that and become like overly intellectualized. So the more we bring, our body, our emotions, our hearts into this work and create collective experiences where it's not abstract, it's just the experience, in the moment, then the more people also can pick up on it. Yeah.
Exactly. And I love that you said that because it is not abstract. It is esoteric in the sense that it requires, as Virginia said, the paradigm shift, or what I call the epiphany. And it's almost like seeing it as a puzzle or a riddle in this process. So you could go, let's shoot ahead to, I don't know, you can say 5 years if you want, or 10 years, or next week. It doesn't really matter. But in the future, this investment that you made in this with your soul and your intellect and everything, and the other people doing network weaving around the world, what do you envision the impact being? And I'm going to tweak the question a little bit, if you don't mind, on the fly, Adrian. Just listen to my own intuition. Is how do you know it worked? Because that could be inside of people, a sense of belonging and well-being, which we don't necessarily know, or it could be data, or it could be a chain of events. So how do you know that this idea that you're bringing in, or really amplifying into the world, how do you know it worked? How will you know?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. And well, I mean, one piece is like we're not kind of chasing a far distant, unrealistic utopia. Like I'm very aware that ecosystems are collapsing. We've like gone across like multiple ecological tipping points. Like this century is going to be very chaotic. There's going to be a lot of loss, a lot of suffering, and I think within that turbulence and within that chaos and these systems violently breaking down in some ways, I would envision that the more people are starting to weave networks, weave, even smaller communities of belonging, the more these communities and networks are going to be able to strengthen resilience, creatively address, local, bioregional, global challenges. And yeah, I mean, the thing that I can that we as the weavers working on this game, but also with the Fito network can influence is like how many people pick this up and start identifying as weavers and start to collaborate and build these kind of communities. And then a lot of it I feel like is also up for emergence, like that's my main experience with these networks is like we can have all the plans and all the outputs and all the measurable impacts, which I think is still a very kind of global north thing of like trying to box everything into like what are the indicators and so on. But ultimately, when the collapse deepens and people are, really looking for where are we going? Where are we going? And there's these kind of existential questions coming up, right? Like I think a metaphor that works is like a person that has a near death experience because of a car crash, has this moment of like what you said, Justin, like this epiphany of like, oh, the way I've been living my life really doesn't really work. Wasn't fulfilling. And I feel like that's what's happening on a collective level, that there's this breakdown and breakthrough simultaneously. So I think the more weavers there are, the better we're going to be able to hospice what needs to die, which I've been speaking to, these dominant mindsets and systems of coloniality, of capitalism, of patriarchy, all these systems that create so much harm, kind of composting that and simultaneously moving into a paradigm where we get to like creatively work together with life, where we are aligned with the land, where we are in a deeper kind of connection with other species, where we live in more reference, more consciousness in that sense. And that's kind of like on a very big picture, but then obviously I would also like to see very specific systemic changes, and like it depends on the system, right? Like I would like to see education systems moving from this kind of very authority based frontal teaching to much more nature-based participatory learning. I would like to see that there is much less systemic racism in all the kinds of different systems, right? So it then really depends and on the specific kind of systemic changes. But that's what a lot of different networks and a lot of different weavers are working on, and it's not really predictable, and like
Sure.
I don't think it has to be. Yeah.
Right. I love that answer.
Love it.
And I have a follow-up to that too, is when did you first start digging into this idea of weaving? How long ago was that time-wise?
Yeah, I think like my story around that is like I started weaving in my friend circle like in the last 2 years of school. So I was excluded in school, and then I went to have different friend circles, and it was more in the sense of hanging out and doing fun things together. And then I had this kind of shift towards what's my purpose, what's my contribution, a lot of
Hmm.
soul searching in that sense. And then around 10 years ago, I started my first kind of local weaving organization. And I kind of came across this term, as I mentioned, from June Holly's
Hmm.
work. And then ever since, I've kind of just went down the rabbit hole. And I think if you're listening to this, like I met so many amazing people through this journey, and really this field is also very welcoming in a sense. There's a lot of events online, but also probably in your local surroundings, and there are weavers out there. So if you're looking for some, um, reach out and look for them, because there's quite a lot as well. Yeah.
So what in that 10 years, other than let's call it normal maturity, normal, just life, how has this work transformed you? How do you
Mm.
where do you think you would be as a person, as a human, if you hadn't started to go deeper into these ideas and these models?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like there's something very fundamental about, a sense of like being of service, that there is something greater than myself that I'm contributing to. And that's where I've gained a lot of kind of sense of purpose and confidence to just, take risks and work from a place of, devotion and dedication to the planet and to other people. And I feel like, yeah, particularly with the weaving piece, really following that, I've been participating in a lot of collective moments where I don't know if you had that yourself, but like where there really is like a shift in energy, and like before it was all talking heads, and there you had this sense of separation and contraction, and then at some point, something shifts, and all of a sudden like the room is lightening up, and there's like this kind of buzzing, and there's this energy, and like there's a kind of life force, and a way of yeah, let's really do things together, let's learn with each other. And I've went through many of these processes, and I think it's really this kind of felt experience that it works, and that it feels really significant, I guess, to operate from that
Yeah.
place. So that really, I think those were kind of transcendental moments, I guess, in these kind of collective spaces, and that really yeah, shifted a lot of my mindset and my worldview and how I show up in the world.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. I'm a little jealous that you did it way sooner in your calendar age than it took me. But any final thoughts or questions for Adrian, Virginia?
No, I'm really grateful that you are sharing all this with us. I mean, and very grateful that, as you said, we are more than it seems. It's just that we need to find each other and start. I mean, I'm glad that we find each other on LinkedIn and that now we're connected and that we can keep connecting other people that are thinking the same way and can share experiences and research and knowledge and lessons learned and keep this growing. So thank you so much for sharing all your experience and projects and ideas with us. We're going to put everything on the show notes for people to be able to reach out to you and try the game and experimenting with all of this, because you said something and it's true. And Justin mentioned the other day too, that everything that has to do with complexity, system thinking, network weaving, like coaching, like pizza, like sex, you can try to explain it, but you really have to experience it to to really get it. You
Yeah.
have to experience it. We can try to explain it to you, but it's never the same. It's
Yeah.
something that you have to
Yeah.
try yourself. So
Yeah.
thank you so much, Adrian, for being
Yeah.
here.
That's great. That's great. And
Yeah,
the link
yeah.
to the link, just to emphasize, this will be published when the game is out. And so go get it, go use it. And I'm sure, and we'll have Adrian's how to find him on LinkedIn. And let's tap into the collective intelligence and make cool stuff in the world. So we're going to shift to the second show part. So we'll say goodbye to you, Adrian. Thank you for your articulate and thoughtful and sincere answers, and we'll see you again soon.
Yes.
Wonderful. Yeah, thanks so much, Justin and Virginia, for having me. And yeah, also congratulations, on all the work that you're building. I feel like it's very relevant to highlight more systems shakers and make this field a lot more visible. So thanks for all of your engagements. And yeah, I hope it was useful to you if you're
Very
listening to this. And
good.
yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Adrian.
Goodbye.
Bye.
All right. We have a few more minutes, right?
Yeah, we got time for a decent second show. Yeah, I mean, I think he's the first person that I've talked to besides you about the things that you know. I mean, there's other system thinkers, but the way that he described it, it's fascinating. So I'm really curious what you thought of his ideas and everything.
Absolutely resonate with everything. I mean, when we talk about the intersectional leadership process, for instance, we talk about starting with yourself and your mindset. What he was saying, he was referring to unlearn a lot of the things, what we call in massive decolonizing your mind. So it's in the same page as how we unlearn the biases and the all the belief systems that we have inherited and we've been socialized with and conditioned by, so we can open up to a new paradigm, to new perspectives, to just enrich our life and everybody's life with a clean mindset, let's say. So that resonate with the work that we're doing and all the network weaving. In some way, I mean, they're specialized and they're, is so much that you can learn when you start understanding how systems work and you work with systems intentionally. so much that you can learn, and you can be a specialist on each one of the specific approaches. There are so many, which is absolutely delicious. It's really wonderful. But one of the things that we share is that is network weaving. What he was saying is to build resilience and to increase
Hmm.
the capacity of communities, whatever it is, an organization, a group, a city, a country, a region, the planet, but to build the capacity of that community, of that group, to solve complex problems in a more systemic way, to be more
Mm.
creative, more to really tap into the intelligence of the whole. We do that also in our work, and the way we talk about it is to increase the capacity for collaboration and for innovation. That is really, that is how is to make an inventory of the resource that we have within ourselves, between ourselves, and how we really tap into all the resource available to solve complex problems in a creative way. So we
Mm.
I resonate so much with the work that Adrian is doing, and the network weavers are doing, is part of the work of thinkers.
Yeah. And what really stood out to me when he talked about separateness, and this is, I make it pretty public about my spiritual views and being, uh, for lack of a better term, a Christian, but not in the gross, weird way. And so as I was listening to him, I had this sort of vibration feeling in my inner being, because when he started talking about separateness, it reminded me that for tens of thousands of years, the predominant belief system was oneness. That was in the world, and there were some warlike indigenous tribes that didn't necessarily believe in oneness, but they still believed in some version of like there was a spirit in everything. And it reminded me of something I shared the other day, that consciousness is systems thinking. Not all systems thinking is consciousness, but consciousness is systems thinking of the way it operates in the world. And that he gave homage and credit to indigenous people. It was like, that's cool, because there was an awareness of this kind of ancient holiness and we're rediscovering it. And I just got the chills because of that. Like, we're rediscovering some things that have been around and oppressed. And I think it's fascinating from the grand global history arc of time, that the things that have been or suppressed by oppressive systems are the things that are going to be their demise. Oneness, feminine energy, creativity, diversity, those are
Collaboration.
going to, what's that?
Collaboration.
Collaboration. Those are the things that are going to, imagine that. The things that were oppressed will be the things that will defeat the oppressor. And I don't know, it just made me feel, with a lot of like bad headlines and things feel completely disordered, that there's an orderliness to all of this. And that's really what faith is. Faith is not in the known. Faith is trusting in the orderliness of it all.
Yeah.
So I was surprised, because I had read everything, and you told me about your conversation with him, and I read his stuff, and I'm like, well, this is gonna be a nerd conversation, but I felt it in my soul. It was really surprising.
Yeah.
So.
There is one more thing that I really love the way he explained it. And I think that I hope it helped other people to understand it as well. He was talking about networking, and the way we understand networking, the way networking has been promoted, it comes from um, ego-based transactional
Hmm.
relationship. That is most of the things that we do, is like what I get from it, and how can I give something so that person is in depth with me. And so is this, even the concept of reciprocity sometimes
Right.
is misunderstood as something like, oh, now I'm obliged, like now I'm
Yeah.
but when you think from an ecosystem perspective, and so think of a forest, right? And you think of
Mm-hmm.
the big trees, but you also think of the microorganism in the soil, and you think of the birds and the squirrels and the little animals and all the different plants around, everything, like the worms, everything. And you think that each one of them is connected to everybody else and somehow contributing, not that I'm gonna give to the tree and I'm gonna give to the squirrel, is I'm giving to the forest because the forest is gonna keep me alive. The
Right.
forest
Right.
is gonna give me back. So I don't keep count and I don't keep tracks and like tags and,
Mm-hmm.
well, I gave you twice and you haven't gave me
Right.
only once. And it's not about that. Is the concept that I'm not giving expecting something else in return from you, because I will get it as you grow and as you become stronger. The soil is becoming stronger, and
Yeah.
therefore I'm gonna be enriched and nourished by that as well. So I love the
Right.
way he explained it, because it makes sense when you see a forest and you say, like,
Right.
why elements in a forest network and they
Mm-hmm.
collaborate with each other. It's a
Yeah.
completely different approach.
Yeah. Like aspens and mushrooms, and there's so many things like that. Well, I'm so glad that you had the intuition to reach out to him and connect with him, and as your business partner and your brand coach. Good job. Uh,
Thank you. And I really
it,
highly recommend for people to connect with him and follow him.
yeah.
He shares amazing research on his
Yeah.
LinkedIn
He's
profile.
very generous with his
Yeah.
information. Yeah.
Yes.
So very good. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this episode of the Massive Change Show. If you are listening to this and have a guest that we should know, please introduce us. There'll be a link to do that down below. Like I said at the beginning, we are looking for system shakers. So these are people doing things that are going to agitate the current system, and that they've dedicated, like Adrian has, to their life to it. And if you know that, and of course, if you know of any social impact leaders that need executive coaching, leadership development, or brand strategy, please remember us. We're really good at those things, and we only work with social impact brands. So keep that in mind.
Yes.
That's all for today.
Okay. See you next time.